Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, good evening. Welcome to King's College London. My name is Fumi Olonishaki. I'm Vice President for International Engagement and Service at King's College London. I'm also Professor of Security, Leadership and Development at the African Leadership Center in the School of Global Affairs at King's. It's my singular pleasure to welcome you to King's College London today for a special keynote event as we continue. In fact, it is the penultimate day and penultimate event of the Africa Week, and we saved this for today for a whole range of reasons, which I'm sure we'll have time to go into. This is special for several reasons. It is special because of the subject of this keynote for the Africa Week at this particular moment in the world. It's also special because of the nature of the relationship King's has had with the individual as well as the institution. Our relationship with Professor Benedict Oramah, President of Afrexim Bank, goes back well over a decade. He had course in a talk in our Denmark Hill campus last November at our Institute for Psychiatry, Psychology, and Neuroscience to talk a bit more and to give some background about that relationship. I suspect he might allude to that relationship tonight as well. But I can say a little bit about King's College London's relationship with Afrexim Bank. And I'm certain, Professor Oramah, that this will be one of your many lasting legacies. It's also an illustration of King's Vision 2029 to make the world a better place. We're at this moment in time, remapping our strategic vision. We call it King's 2030. King's will be 200 years old in 2029. And we're preparing not just to celebrate, but to cross that line to a new world for King's. And it's indeed a new world for all of us. I should say, however, that since our foundation, King's has been deeply committed to serving the needs of society. Our expertise as an institution, as a university, is a force for good. We have a long tradition of active engagement with the world and its most challenging problems, above and beyond what might be expected of a university. This commitment to service is embedded in our teaching, research, and operations, and our external engagement across the board. I should say this because at our founding in 1829, that founding and our mission statement was to be in service to society. In service to society at the time, of course, for a university that was founded as one that is integrated in so many other ways, not just with the state, with the monarchy at the time, but with the Church of England. That has since evolved to deploying all of our assets, research, education, our people in service of society in different ways. The portfolio that I represent is defined by the strategic goal, knowledge with purpose, service, and impact. So our partnerships locally, nationally, and globally enrich the student learning experience and strengthen our research. We support global efforts to build a better future for all, guided, of course, by the Sustainable Development Goals, but predates, actually, the Sustainable Development Goals. So to strengthen our collective impact, we're bringing together our assets and expertise and working collectively to respond to the most pressing global issues. Deploying our knowledge in service to society and engaging the communities we serve in London, in UK, and globally through equitable partnerships. By adopting integrated approaches that unite research, education, service, and engagement to increase our impact and facilitate cooperation. And of course, by implementing a whole university approach to delivering and measuring impact. This is how we truly have continued to be in service to society. Now, this partnership that I mentioned earlier with Afrexim Bank derives from this strategic goal I just discussed: knowledge with purpose, service, and impact. But our partnership began not just with the university, but with King's College Hospital. Work first commenced on partnership with King's College Hospital to develop a 500-bed hospital in Abuja, Nigeria, the Abuja project for short. And I'm sure that President Oramah will speak of this a little bit. Now, the Abuja project is supposed to serve as a pilot project, the aim being to replicate the model across the African continent with an initial focus on East and Central Africa. Such a model will prioritize a whole range of things, and I don't want to go into that. Our role here is the fact that as King's College London, in 2023, we had a scoping study which sought to explore opportunities for a long-term partnership between King's and Afrexim Bank in parallel with the Abuja project. Afrexim commissioned King's College London to undertake that scoping study for the development of a new medical school, nursing school, and research center in Abuja, Nigeria. And this that has now been called the African Medical Center of Excellence, or with a research institute, is something that we think is going to bring us in collaboration for a better world, but especially for a better Africa when it comes to making an impact, a real impact in the lives of people for some time to come. And therefore, this evening, you understand why it is fitting that today's lecture or today's keynote takes place at King's College London at a momentous time, but not just in the world, but also I think for Afrexim and for President Benedict Oramah. I shall now call on Professor Eka Ibe, Professor of Development Economics in Africa and the Director of the African Leadership Center at King's. We also have a continental base in Nairobi. Our Executive Director is here, but the Director of the African Leadership at King's will introduce our keynote speaker and moderate this evening's proceedings. Welcome to you, Professor Eka Ibe. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you here this evening. It's an honor to have you here with us, Professor Oramah, giving us this talk that is very much in line with the conversations we've been having here at King's all week as part of our Africa Week, where we've been debating and deliberating the dissonance and the distances that exist first within the countries on the continent, in some ways between citizens and the institutions that are designed to serve them, thinking about this within the African continent as well. And then perhaps especially fundamentally and in ways that Professor Oramah's work at the Afrexim Bank engages distance and dissonance, is thinking about the distances between our continent, the African continent, and other parts of the world. And so it was really exciting for us to gather here today to listen to the kind of innovative work that has been going on our continent, a space where often we're told there's very little of promise. And here it's wonderful to be able to take the opportunity to showcase an institution that's been doing really significant and I dare say quite radical work. Thinking through how we narrow some of those distances, especially when we think of the vagaries of the global financial system and the ways in which it subordinates many parts of the global south, not least our African continent. It's quite interesting. This evening as I came is World Book Day, and I have my badges celebrating our African authors, Chinua Achebe and Florence Nwapa. But something else I did as I came today was wear this scarf, which is it's come from a Nigerian designer, Etwen Bassi, which showcases Nigerian coins. So in Nigeria, our currency is Naira and Kobo. And in many ways, it's interesting when I speak about Kobo to my children, they have no idea what Kobo is. And it was fascinating. Last time I went to Nigeria, I found that the only way I could find these coins was in the craft market. So it's quite interesting that this is legal tender. This is actual currency that is not in use, that is actually, its only value is its cultural value as a means of archiving currency. This, I was speaking to our director, Shubhanyoni, who were reflecting on similar things in Zimbabwe. This is very normal on our continent. In some ways, we accept it as the way it is, that legal tender are treated as craft products. And this is part of the journey of consistent devaluation of African currency so that the value ends up holding, meaning very little. So it's really critical that we're able to host you, Professor Oramah, to be able to engage and think through some of the vital work that must be done for us to question these, what are seeming truths that we've accepted about our continent. With that, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to welcome you to speak about Africa in the emerging New World Order. Let me please take a moment to say a little something about Professor Oramah's, Professor Oramah. Professor Benedict Oramah is the president and chairman of the board of directors of the African Export-Import Bank, Afrexim Bank, as it's widely known. Professor Oramah was previously appointed to the position of executive vice president of the bank in October 2008, a position he held until his appointment as president in June 2015 during the 22nd annual general meeting in Lusaka, Zambia. And he was inaugurated in September 2015. He holds a PhD in agricultural economics, obtained in 1991, and has been decorated as a professor of international trade and finance by Adeleke University, one of Nigeria's foremost private universities, in 2018. Professor Oramah worked as the assistant manager, research for the Nigerian Export-Import Bank from 1992 to 1994, before joining the African Export-Import Bank as chief analyst in 1994, rising to the position of senior director, planning and business development in 2007. And Professor Oramah has written over 30 articles on a range of African economic and trade-related matters, many of which have been published in leading international journals. So it's really apt that we are honored to be able to welcome you to the university, because we know the kind of work, research, knowledge production is important to you. If I may welcome you now to please come and join us to deliver your lecture. Please join me in welcoming you.
Hello?
We can hear you.
You can hear me? Allow me to recognize some excellencies here who have served, continue to serve our continent in many ways. Thank you for sparing the time to join us here today. Our gratitude goes to our dear sisters, Professor Fumi Onishaki, and Professor Ika Ibe, my dear brother, Kayode Hayemi, all of this great university, for the honor of this invitation to deliver remarks at the 2025 King's Africa Week. We're particularly grateful to the Africa Leadership Center, the Africa Research Group, the Department of War Studies at King's College for organizing this platform. As Fumi said, my relationship with King's College dates back more than a decade. It was fortuitous, came to King's College Hospital as efforts were made to save my life. But that journey became God's way of showing me a path to what I believe is one of my destinies. Contribute using the platform I have, taking our continent forward. Contribute, making it possible for us to take our destiny in our hands, especially where it matters the most, the healthcare sector. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our world is at a critical juncture. The global system that we used to know appears to be crumbling fast. And in its wake, new systems are emerging, each competing for dominance. There is therefore no clarity, I think from my point of view, as to how the vacuum will be filled. An air of big uncertainty hangs in the air. Those who view uncertain events as risky events have already concluded that the risk before our world is monumental. Some analysts and pundits are already making efforts to clear the fog. On August 21, 2023, the Financial Times featured an opinion piece titled "The a la carte World, a New Geopolitical Order." In that article, Alec Russell, the author, made a striking observation, and I quote, "Welcome to the a la carte world. As the post-Cold War age of America as a sole superpower fades, the old era, when countries had to choose from a prefix menu of alliances, is shifting into a more fluid order. Beijing, the standoff between Washington and Beijing and the West's effective abandonment of a 3 decades dream that the gospel of the free market will lead to a more liberal version of the Chinese Communist Party is presenting an opportunity for much of the world, unquote. So Russell is right up to that point. The opportunities and, I must add, risks that a more fluid global order offers to Africa and similar developing countries can be likened to the opportunities and risks that the emergence of disruptive technologies offer to startups, which is usually a chance to rapidly rise to prosperity or the possible misfortune of being wiped out of existence. This kind of potentially tectonic structural change in global affairs and systems is not new. History teaches us that the world has evolved over centuries through a system of periodic flux, driven by circumstances and demands of the times and the state of technology. Africa's unacceptable underdevelopment as we know it today has evolved from those changes. That is why we must not sit on our palms and watch as mere spectators events unfolding before our very eyes these days. For instance, religion was the dominant force that shaped much of Europe and the Middle East throughout the Middle Ages that spanned 5th century to the 15th century AD. Subsequently, the demand for calories, spices, and other traded items fueled the rise of the maritime powers of Portugal and Spain, who were able to explore faraway lands to trade, and through the process, build the foundation of what is today known as the global economy. From trading goods, the demand for labor to found the new lands of the Americas and the Caribbean islands led to the infamous slave trade that significantly depopulated Africa and arguably laid the foundations for the centuries of struggle and underdevelopment of our continent. By the mid-18th century, the Industrial Revolution had set in here in Britain and later in most of continental Europe, which altered the relations of production in terms of capital. The economic rationale for the slave trade became threatened. For Britain, the epicenter of the first industrial revolution, it was important that slavery ended if they hoped to maximize the benefits of the industrial revolution, built essentially on the steam engine. It is little wonder that slavery was first abolished in Britain by an act. Earlier, some countries had tried to abolish slavery, but they all reverted, for example, in France. Britain also used its imperial power to enforce the abolition globally. With the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine technology improved travel and production and expanded world markets. A new constraint then emerged, namely access to raw materials. Global powers of the time shifted focus to securing raw materials for natural resources to feed their manufacturing complexes. Hence, the scramble for overseas territories that ensued in the 18th and 19th centuries among the European powers. This then culminated in the Berlin Conference of 1885, which led to the signing of the General Act of Berlin, an accord that formalized and regulated colonialism, as it were, and trade in Africa. It serves as the foundation for the fragmentation of the continent into atomistic units as we know it today. This deep scar has left an indelible mark on the face of the continent and is the principal reason for Africa's underdevelopment. The strategy of colonialism, which was aptly captured in 1920 by the French colonial administrator Abbas Sarraut, guaranteed that. And it is vital that I set it out again so that we can appreciate the strategic foundations of the problem we must solve as a people if we are going to rise above the levels of poverty we found ourselves today. But as I wrote, and I quote, that economically, a colonial possession means to the home country simply a privileged market once it withdraws the raw materials it needs, dumping its manufacturers in return. Economic policy is reduced to rudimentary procedures of gathering crops and bartering them. Moreover, by simply imposing on its colonial dependency, the exclusive consumption of its manufactured products, the metropolis prevents any effort to use or manufacture local raw materials on the spot and any contact with the rest of the world. The colony is forbidden to establish any industry to improve itself by economic progress, to rise above the stage of producing raw materials, or to do business with the neighboring territories for its own enrichment across the constant barriers erected by the metropolitan power, unquote. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as colonialism spread, the Industrial Revolution also gathered steam and led to the emergence of factories and wage labor working class in Europe. The so-called struggle between labor and capital intensified across Europe, and with it, the rise and spread of the Marxist philosophy. The successes of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917 and the emergence of the Soviet Union in 1922, the foundation for the spread of the Marxist-Leninist movement globally was formed. This impacted Africa, as following the end of the Second World War in 1945, the Soviet Union increased its support for independence and liberation movements in colonies across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Colonialism retreated in the late 1950s and early 1960s, following the granting of political independence to many colonies. The period from the end of the Second World War to the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991 was therefore marked by intense, cold, and sometimes hot proxy wars that destabilized Africa. However, with the exit of the Soviet Union, a unipolar world dominated by the US emerged. At the same time, globalists held sway in the US government and pursued globalization and multilateralism by accelerating the conclusion of the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations in 1933, after many years of trade talks, and the creation of the World Trade Organization in 1995. Trade economies and globalists also took control of the Bretton Woods institution, that is the World Bank and the IMF, and helped shape and implement the globalization agenda favored by the US government at that time. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to say a few words about globalization, because understanding it will help us appreciate the drivers of the current uncertainties before us. Globalization has been defined as a process of international integration of goods, technology, labor, and capital. A global economy is one in which firms and financial institutions operate transnationally. In its purest form, globalization requires factors of production and access to be perfect substitutes everywhere. Various studies have shown that the process of globalization is a function of three factors, namely openness, that is, the pace at which various legal, regulatory, and political obstacles to trade and factor movements are removed. Second, competitiveness, that is, the ability of domestic producers to establish a strong position in the international division of labor. And finally, harmonization, and that is the international standardization of rules, institutions, and technologies. At this early stage, proponents of globalization argued that it will lead to convergence, that is, a reduction in disparity between rich and poor countries in key indices of economic well-being, namely income, trade, technology, and so on. This was expected to arise through a combination of efficiency gain, faster capital accumulation, and higher productivity across the board. The efficiency gains were expected to be derived from a number of points. One of them is increased trade, which will foster specialization, enhance competitiveness, and more uniformity in prices. The second is greater capital mobility, which will reinforce the gains from trade. In addition, it was thought that globalization will allow savings to be pooled and enable a more efficient international allocation of capital across boundaries and sectors. It was thought that developing countries would benefit as capital would move from low return capital rich developed economies to high return capital scarce developed economies. And the third, the transfer of technology and management skills based on relative returns across sectors and geographies. In over 20 years of its implementation, globalization is credited with contributing to the greatest reduction in poverty levels over a very short period. Almost 1 billion people are estimated to have pulled out of poverty, largely in China, Asia, thanks to globalization. Recent technological advancements, product innovations, and the emergence of global value chains are attributable to the borderless nations created by globalization. For developed countries, the benefits of globalization included greater access to developing markets, increased economies of scale and scope, productivity gains, job creation, and access to raw materials and natural resources. Among developing countries, evidence shows that improved access to technology and capital has helped raise productivity, standard of living, and helped lift millions of people out of extreme forms of poverty. Notwithstanding the foregoing, we have of recent seen the imposition of and increases in tariff levels on certain categories of imports and from certain origins by the US government, indicating that the US government is not happy with the outcome of globalization. By instituting nationalist and protectionist measures, the US government hopes to force the return of manufacturing jobs, especially of the labor-intensive types, back to the US. Over the last 3 to 4 decades, it's estimated that close to 800 US companies have either relocated or have shifted significant proportions of their operations abroad. It's no wonder that the engine room of protectionist sentiments that helped elect President Donald Trump in 2016 and again in 2024 was in the so-called Rust Belt of the US Midwest. It is perhaps similar reasons that the British voted to leave the European Union in 2023. It is important to note that while the US Midwest was in decline, the US East and West Coast were booming, driven by technology. But because the assumption of perfect substitution in labor and factors did not work, the labor that was displaced in the Midwest could not take up those jobs. This globalization-induced dichotomous evolution of national economies has also created inequality and inequities within industrialized economies, fueling an upsurge in nationalist feelings, xenophobia, and overall antipathy against globalization. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is this widespread discontent with globalization that is triggering the new world order that is clearly in the offing. While the nature of the emergent new world order is yet unclear, what is driving it is fairly obvious, being anti-globalization and nationalistic feelings in much of the West, and an apparent strategic realignment in much of the rest of the world. The forces shaping the emergent new world order can be particularly dangerous to the global economy because they are triggering restrictive rather than expansionary responses. They are making countries to look inwards rather than to look outwards. The consequence that we are likely to see a much more divided and leaderless world. Given the foregoing, what should Africa do? What can small economies like those of Africa do in the midst of a major change proceeding with the hurricane force wind? Now, permit me to offer some insights drawn from Africa's long history of being a passive player in the past evolution of global systems, as well as the opportunities we think that these emerging disruptions present to our continent. I think the important first step is that we must understand that Africa is poor and underdeveloped today, because even in the midst of plenty, it has limited access to capital. We must appreciate that in the new world of anti-globalization and nationalism, capital flows into Africa will not be forthcoming. In other words, but capital flows from capital-rich developed economies helped develop China and some Asian economies at the height of globalization. That would not likely be the case for Africa today. Accordingly, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we must quickly build and accumulate our own capital. In my opinion, this will require urgent actions around a few areas. Permit me to outline them. The first thing I think we'll do, and we can do this one quickly, is to strengthen our multilateral financial institutions and national development finance institutions. There's a lot of valuable time being devoted to the push to reform the so-called international financial architecture. I may be wrong, but I think it will be a futile effort. The international financial architecture was built by capital-rich developed economies for a purpose, their own purpose, not our purpose. We must all understand that unless the reform we are proposing continues to serve their purpose, nothing will come out of the effort we are making to reform it. It will just be a waste of our scarce resources. Instead of wasting valuable time and money, such effort and resources should be devoted to increasing the capital of African multilateral financial institutions and working with them under the platform of the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions, which we created last year, to constitute them collectively and individually into formidable forces for African development. The fact that the asset base of the 7 members of the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions is just about $80 billion, representing a paltry 2.8% of the continent's GDP, speaks volumes about what needs to be done. Compared with China, where the China Development Bank and China Afrexim Bank boast asset base of about $3.5 trillion, which represented about 20% of China's GDP in 2022. And in Brazil, the Development Bank of Brazil, called BNDES, reported assets of about $133 billion, again, about 7% of Brazil's GDP. In Africa, 7 of its multilateral financial institutions cannot even boast up to 3% of the GDP. Yet, the binding constraint to your development is capital. Yet, the instrument to form that capital is your financial institution. And because Africa has a Afrexim Bank, just give you an example of what can happen. That significant oil financing capacities, oil refining capacities are emerging in the Gulf of Guinea. So today, Afrexim Bank has created, and we expect that by the end of next year, we will be able to create close to 1.7 million barrels refining capacity on the continent, where nothing existed just a few years ago. The Gulf of Guinea produces about 5 million barrels of crude oil. 5 million barrels of crude oil until, say, 3 years ago were exported all the way around the world to countries that do not produce even 1 barrel of crude oil. They refine them, they export to us and sell elsewhere. Whenever you find commodity price shock, Africa goes into a major crisis. Because by exporting those raw commodities and bringing in imported finished goods, we remain in perpetual deficit. And beginning to turn it around must start with our energy resources. And we have the oil to do that. And that's why we committed to do it. And we're showing that it can be done. And we hope that one day Nigeria and Angola will stand up and say that they will ban completely the export of crude oil, so that those refineries that depend on them in other parts of the world can be relocated to where the crude oil is, so that the services that create jobs, bring technology that support where those refineries actually can come to our continent, where the resources exist. And it's because we have institutions that can now support that exercise, even if very small, that I'm able to say this. And I can also say that it's thanks to Afrexim Bank that Africa was able to put down $2 billion on the table to buy COVID-19 vaccines for its people during the height of COVID-19, when nobody was willing to give vaccines to anybody. Even when we eventually arranged to put the money together, we could not see vaccines to buy. Again, showing lack of capacity to do research, to manufacture, to produce. Even India was able to look after itself and the rest of the world. And because of Afrexim Bank and the Africa Finance Corporation, that the goal of building 100,000 hectares of industrial capacity across Africa is well on its way. We have a subsidiary company we are invested in ourselves and Africa Finance Corporation called Arise Integrated Industrial Platform. We set ourselves a target to build 100,000 hectares of industrial capacity. Today, we are almost at 20,000 hectares. Yeah, capacities created, industries in Gabon, in Benin, in Togo, in Chad, developing in Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, Nigeria, Kenya, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Unless we are able to build out those industrial capacities, we will not be able to take advantage of the changes that are happening today under the new world order. New supply chains will be created. Supply chains that will only be underpinned by availability of labor. And we have labor. What we're trying to do as banks is to be able to provide the capital to be able to create the capacities. These capacities were during the height of globalization provided by American and European capital. They are not forthcoming. So we have to find a way of doing it. And as I'm saying here, we have to put money in our banks to be able to do that. In the same vein, we must jettison the idea that made many of our economies to dissolve their national development banks. We must understand that there's no way our commercial banks can lead the way in financing risky and long-term development projects. The Bretton Woods institutions advised our countries years ago during the structural reforms to dissolve our development banks. And many countries did. Some converted them into commercial banks. The end result is what we see today. There are no banks to support our SMEs, there are no banks to finance our development. So we rely on foreign financiers. And then when foreign financiers leave, we are left on our own. We should reinstate these banks, make them run professionally, and must be serious enough to recapitalize them whenever they need to be recapitalized, that because of inflation or other macroeconomic factors beyond the control of those who manage it. If you look at other countries that have become successful, look at South Korea, many of the countries that have become successful, you will see that the countries recapitalize their exim banks, their development finance institutions, so that they will continue to perform the role they were created for. We should not listen to anybody who comes to tell us that these are not efficient. We should know what is efficient. If the people running the institutions are not running them well, you fire them and bring people. It's not by dissolving them that you solve the problem. Creating the institution has a purpose. Every successful country or continent, another thing we must do is that we must control our financial system. Every successful country or continent does the same, except Africa. American banks are owned by Americans. Here in Britain, I believe most of the banks, the strong banks, are owned by the British. The same can be said in many European countries. The same can be said for China. The same can be said for India. It's only in Africa that African banks are controlled by foreigners. Africans must participate effectively in their financial system. I'm not saying foreign banks should not operate. No, they should be there. But it cannot be, as we have or we've had for years, although it's changing, that in some countries, almost 100% control of the financial system is in foreign hands. You have to have your own banks, because you cannot expect a credit committee that decides credit that's located outside your country to understand the sociology of your country. If a credit committee sees a name they're familiar with and sees another name that they've never had that looks like an accident about to happen, just by the name, they will decline that credit. So you must have your own financial institutions without saying that you not allow others to come, because others bring competition. Afrexim Bank has been able to invest almost $1 billion in support of African banks and investors to acquire the subsidiaries of international banks exiting the continent. As some of you may know, many banks, many international banks, all of a sudden decided to leave, to the extent that there was a point some countries could not even have access to payments because the banks just left. And actually, that was why we introduced our payment services. And I must say thank you to them, because that's our fastest growing business today. The Afrexim Bank stands ready to provide more support in this direction. Again, building our own capital base will also require that we use our natural resources. The notion that we would have we should leave our minerals under the ground for the future generation is a disinformation spread by those who want Africa to continue to serve as an unpaid for warehouse for the natural resources others need. We should endeavor to take out our minerals, take them out of the ground as quickly as possible, and use the proceeds of their sale to develop a more dynamic economy, further of manufacturing, services, and intellectual property accumulation. We should take out the minerals as others. If you see mining companies, when they're giving concessions, they do not wait. They go quickly to take away all the minerals, because the risks of leaving the minerals under the ground are so great. Our countries know that keeping the minerals under the ground while they are poor is useless. It doesn't add to your GDP. It doesn't give you more borrowing headwinds. If you take it out, You can use it to build your infrastructure that you need. You can use it to train your people. You can use it to build a more dynamic sector. Singapore, Japan have little or no means. They've been able to develop their economies much bigger than the entire continental economy. We should try to build our own capital using what we have and not listen to anybody telling us that we should leave it for the future generation. When the future generation comes, they will tell them to leave it for another future generation. I think they're all so your economists here. You can help me draw the model that can ever lead to those minerals being exploited for our own. Minerals under the ground, as I said earlier, are as good as useless. And we must leverage our resources, including our forests that serve as the lungs of the world and for which we currently receive nothing. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, while Africa is poor in capital, it is rich in people. Africa is the youngest continent with population under 30, estimated to reach 1.4 billion or 56% in 2050. By that year, it will account for 25% of global population and 37% of world population below the age of 30. It follows that Africa will constitute a significant share of global markets in the years ahead, be a major source of young and vibrant labor force, and can become a major source of innovation and creativity that can drive the entire world. While it is still uncertain as to what the new world order will look like, what is clear is that the dominant forces that will emerge are likely to be leaders in digital technology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and whatever their successors may be. Africa, with its young, vibrant, and growing population, stands a great chance of playing a leading role in that new order. But to be able to take advantage of this opportunity, we must make sure we convert our people from simple menial laborers to human capital. That will require investments in education, healthcare, proper housing, so on. We must also create the environment that will foster innovation and creativity. These will include access to venture capital, accelerator programs, private equity, and similar initiatives. And that's why Afrexim Bank has launched a venture capital program, an accelerator program, and an equity fund with commitment that today exceeds more than $1 billion. We've also will be launching in the next few weeks a concessional finance window. A concessional finance window that will operate differently, that will help our businesses to be able to deal with the infrastructure deficit we have. Today, our manufacturing businesses cannot compete globally because, on the average, a manufacturer builds his factory and builds the infrastructure that will support the factory, infrastructure the government ought to have built. So our constitutional finance window is structured such that, if that be the case, the constitutional window may consider granting constitutional financing for the infrastructure, while Afrexim Bank lends commercially to the projects that will produce what will go into the markets and the export. That way, we hope we can bring African manufacturers at near equal footing. We've also, as Fumi mentioned earlier, gone into a partnership with Keynes to improve the healthcare situation on the continent. And that is a project and initiative that would involve investments that will run into billions of dollars. Situation on the continent is so that many countries do not have access to basic healthcare. So when we produce then doctors and nurses and all the healthcare professionals, they are quickly taken away abroad. When our own people fall ill, they die like dogs. But we cannot just complain, continue to complain about it, that we have to do something about it. And that's what we're really very grateful that King's College Hospital, and of course, Christian College Center, Manchester, and University of Wisconsin Teaching Hospital joined us to do this. And beyond that, we also about to launch the medical school, nursing school, also as part of the African Medical Center of Excellence. And that African Medical Center of Excellence would improve health education and development. It also help improve research in the life sciences. The first African Medical Center of Excellence will be launched in Abuja on June, we opened in Abuja on June 5 this year. And other projects in other parts of Africa would also commence soon. We want to make sure that the African Medical Center of Excellence becomes the global center for researching diseases that affect people of African descent, such as sickle cell and so on. We're also working with other major drug manufacturing companies so that we can also begin to do trials on African people for many of the biologics that are now becoming the preferred drugs for curing many non-communicable diseases. The problem we've seen is that so many of the drugs that are produced and many of the treatments that are produced, they're not, the trials are not done on Africans, so they work for others, they do not work sometimes for Africans. So we want to make the center where we do research. We also want to make the center a place for very, very, very globally recognized life sciences research center. Creative African Nexus initiative has also been designed to support the creation and protection of intellectual property produced by Africans in the creative industry. We do this aware that in today's world, it will be holders of intellectual property that control global capital. We've created a subsidiary called Carribbean Creations Incorporated and enabled it to invest in creative industry from a global Africa perspective. And that is to say that they will invest in creating intellectual property, supporting creatives, supporting researchers, not only in the geographic Africa, but also wherever Africans operate. And that is consistent with the work Afrexim Bank is doing, following the designation of the African diaspora as the sixth region of the African Union. Following that, the Caribbean economies have become members of Afrexim Bank, so Afrexim Bank is supporting the 15 island economies, 15 economies, not necessarily island, of the Caribbean. We also launched recently the Global Africa Center in New York. And the work of that center is not only to conduct research, but also to promote access to Afrexim Bank's diaspora program, to support those who are in diaspora and who have businesses or want to invest in Africa, those in Africa who want to invest in diaspora communities abroad. Dear friends, building our own capital requires that we also invest in infrastructure. Forgetting DeepSeek for a moment, leadership in AI requires huge investments in electricity. We need to invest in our roads, ports, railways, hospitals, schools, etc. And the kind of investment that is required is one that enables the integration of Africa through regional value chains. This is estimated that infrastructure investments totaling over $1 trillion over the next decade are required to bridge Africa's infrastructure deficit. This cannot be solely met by government. When you look at total budget of all the African countries, you can see that $1 trillion in 10 years is a tall order. So it must be all hands on deck and involve the use of foreign and local currencies. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which Afrexim Bank helped launch, working with African Union and AfCFTA Secretariat, provides an opportunity for African contractors to develop Africa's infrastructure in a manner that does not create foreign currency sovereign debt. For example, an Egyptian contractor can build ports, roads, and so on in Nigeria. And the Nigerian government or project owner can use Nigerian naira to buy Egyptian pounds to pay off the contract. This way, we can create the stock of capital and infrastructure that can drive Africa's development in a new world without incurring unsustainable levels of foreign debt that keep us down and keep us tied to parties that may have other agenda in the new global order. Delivering all these will require that the continent remains focused on itself and not in any one direction. I think it was the late Colin Krugman who said, we neither look east nor west, we look forward. I think that saying is timely. The African Union Peace and Security Council must be strengthened to minimize conflicts within the continent so that the continent can continue to speak with one voice on issues that matter to it. We should make sure that we do not ourselves get involved in conflicts, expose ourselves to divide and rule tactics. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to reiterate the fact that globalization may be on its way out, but our own continental market offers us an opportunity to create economies of scale for industries and businesses, which will serve as solid foundational capital formation. We must therefore make sure that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement becomes fully operational and serves as a basis for breaking down the 110 borders that divide us. It also helps us to mantle the colonial strategy I had earlier outlined. You will agree with me that in the emerging new world order, small atomistic economies will stand no chance against large, powerful economies. So it's by coming together under this kind of trade deal that we will be able to sit on the table and discuss for both the large and the small. Coming together, we can negotiate bilateral deals better and support the emergence of regional value chains. Afrexim is supporting this movement in many ways, including through the launch and operation of the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. As we all know, we have 42 currencies on the continent, a fragmented payment system. There's no way we can achieve development with that kind of arrangement. It was costing us $5 billion annually just as charges to make payments. The payment to be made from country A to B first goes from country A's currency to another third currency, pay charges. And from that currency goes to the recipient currency, pay another charge. Sometimes it can take as long as 14 days. Today, same transaction takes 2 seconds. Because the least cost of all payments globally under the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. And it is possible now for a farmer in Angola to use Angolan kwanza to pay for a movie being streamed to it, say from Ghana. Doesn't need credit card that would have to be paid for foreign currency. And very soon, we will launch PAPSS card, the Pan-African Payment Settlement Systems card, which is a credit card and debit card that can be used globally. Within Africa, if you are from one country and travel to another country, you will be spending your national currency there. That is what PAPSS is doing. We expect that before the end of the year, we will have most of our countries as members of this innovative body. We're also supporting the AFCFTA Adjustment Fund, which is a fund that we created with the AFCFTA Secretariat to support countries to enable them participate effectively under the new trading regime. And this includes the possible creation of a base fund to provide compensation payments for eligible countries for tariff revenue losses arising from their participation in the AFCFTA. We've also harmonized standards covering automobile, pharmaceutical, textiles, and continue to harmonize standards. And we also knew that harmonizing standard is one thing, but having the quality infrastructure to test the standard is another. And many countries don't have them. So we created a company called the Africa Quality Assurance Center that is today building, testing, and special certification centers across Africa so that the AFCFTA can operate. We've also launched the Transit Guarantee Scheme that is helping for goods to move freely across our borders. The Transit Guarantee Scheme, which we launched initially at $300 million, had now gone. And we thank all those who are supporting us and participating, including the ZEP3, with whom we formed a joint venture to implement this across the continent. We've also signed with the COMESA Secretariat and the AFCFTA Secretariat to launch the COMESA technology and for adoption in other parts of the continent to accelerate the implementation of the Transit Guarantee Scheme all over Africa. These are some of just the few things we are doing to make sure that the AFCFTA works. But what I can assure you is that because we have our own institution, we have our own bank, we work hand in hand with the Secretariat and bring the solutions that are required where those solutions require bank. Finally, I will once again like to thank Mr. Fumi and all the organizers for giving me very, very generous time and for listening. All the best.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Oramah. Really fantastic to learn about the work of the Afrexim Bank so extensively. And in particular, we appreciate how you laid out the need for that work as you started your lecture. Thank you so much. Now it's left for me to invite our first respondent to the lecture, a visiting professor here with us, Dr. Carribbean, a visiting professor here at the African Leadership Center at King's College London, who is also, if I may say, an alumnus of King's College London, receiving his doctorate degree from the Department of War Studies at King's in 1994 and specializing himself in civil military relations as well. His research and policy interests include democratization, constitutionalism, security sector governance, and regionalism in the global context. Now, it's important to bear that in mind as I come to the more recent work that our visiting professor has been doing here, just before he joined us at King's as a visiting professor, having completed his second term as the governor of Ekiti State in Southwest Nigeria in October 2022, where he was also the chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum and president of the Forum of Regions of Africa. He was Nigeria's Minister of Mines and Steel Development in the government of President Muhammadu Buhari between 2015 and 2018. So very much a scholar and a policy actor at the highest levels of government. Please join me in welcoming him to
Thank you, Eka, for
Professor Eka.
Professor, yeah. Professor Eka Igwe, for that introduction. But let me thank Professor Benedict Oramah for that tour de force. I am not surprised, maybe because I am familiar with a lot of what you have been doing over the last 3 decades of your involvement with the Afrexim Bank. Well, you've taken the bank much further along, making it a truly Pan-African institution. And I quite like the way you've also taken us on that historical trajectory from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana to the unipolar world that is dissolving before our very eyes, and to that uncertainty that then informed your perspective on what Africa must do in order to be able to join as co-rule makers rather than recipients, as we've always been, whether you talk of the scramble for Africa, which you referred to in your lecture, 1885 scramble, or the various machinations that had kept the continent in the sorry state that you described. I think it's useful to then assess the point you made about where Africa is and what Africa should do in order to be co-actors, if you like. I mean, and not be a passive player in the global system as you described it. You first highlighted the importance of strengthening our own multinational finance institutions rather than continue to belong exclusively to this global finance architecture created in the post-World War II era, the Bretton Woods institutions, that have also played a critical role in putting Africa in this position that we're in. If you refer to the structural adjustment programs, for example, and the impact that had on the development agenda in our continent. And those reforms, as you correctly claimed, served the interest of the Bretton Woods institutions and its founders rather than our own interest. But there had been attempts, even in that post-World War II era, by African states, including Kwame Nkrumah that you quoted, to build a response mechanism. Some describe it as a non-aligned movement. Others refer to it as the G77. And those instruments were used to also force the global institution to become more fair and equitable in the way they conduct their activities. But even at that, the challenge is we need to do a lot more on our own sphere. African Development Bank started that work before you came on stream. But we also know that the African Development Bank is not an independent institution in that sense. Save for Nigeria, that probably has 10% of the shareholding. It is the regional members, Europeans and the Americans, that dominate what happened in the African Development Bank, in spite of its best efforts to try and accelerate development in a range of ways. And then came Afrexim Bank, a creation of the African Organization of African Unity now, not African Union, and African countries. And in that short space of time, we've seen essentially what the Afrexim Bank has done. I particularly recall, as chair of governors in Nigeria, the kinds of engagements we had with you during COVID-19 and how you stepped in the gap to provide the funds for the African countries to access vaccines during that critical period. A lot of people out there may not know that, but I was involved in those discussions with yourselves, with a number of, I think it's Johnson and Johnson that we were discussing with at the time, and that institution in Geneva.
UNICEF and
Gavi.
COVAX.
COVAX, and it started COVAX in helping to structure the supply and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. And of course, we've also seen the role that you've played in creating those industrial centers you talked about in countries like Ethiopia, even in Nigeria, in Kenya, and a number of other places. I have seen the work of the Arise Integrated Industrial Platform. Clearly, what is most interesting as BRICS nations are discussing de-dollarization, what you're saying about the Pan-African payments solution is something that I believe would become more, will gain more traction amongst African countries, because this debate is on now. And countries like Brazil are very insistent that de-dollarization must happen in the wake of the current attitude of the American government in light of those tectonic shifts you talked about in the geopolitical order. And it would certainly help us in controlling our own financial system. But I guess a lot more work needs to be done to increase the confidence level in that payment system and to ensure that it actually helps to accelerate the AFCFTA agenda. Equally, I have been part of the work you spoke of, the Center of Excellence. And I know the amount of work that has gone into that. I've been there physically in Abuja. And if we're able to then get the ultimate objective of that partnership with King's College going. Yes, the Center of Excellence is one thing that is major in terms of driving medical tourism back to the continent rather than outside the continent. But for me, the greatest attraction there is what we're able to do with building a successor generation of trainees, medical doctors, nurses, health workers, and find a way to keep them on the continent. That's largely the responsibility of our government, but I think it's also the responsibility of our partners outside, because it's not appropriate if we're going to talk genuinely about values of humanity that we train these doctors and train these nurses at almost nothing. And then just before they even get out of their house jobs, they get taken away from Africa to all these countries outside. I mean, yes, all kinds of rationale and arguments can be put forward for that. But I think it's time to reorder the relationship and for our governments particularly to strongly argue for a much more comprehensive arrangement on migration. You talk about demographics too, and I think we're going to get there. And this structured negotiation would necessarily have to be on the basis of, if you're taking this well-trained young Africans out of Africa, what are you giving back to the continent? First, in terms of the cost of training them, and also the cost of replacement, as well as develop in the digital age an arrangement that could enable them to still be useful to us on the continent, even when they choose to go out. Because it's also a personal choice for people who feel, okay, I want to go and make a living elsewhere. But you can still be useful to the continent. And many people have gone outside and relocate back, or even without relocating, still play a critical role on the continent. I think these are areas that we need to pay more attention to. I totally agree with you that atomistic economies cannot survive the onslaught of what is coming. And we need to be able to defend our own environment. I mean, I always tell friends that 90% of the platinum in the world comes from Africa. 75% of the cobalt. The lithium, the energy minerals, the rare earth minerals. I know that our new president talks about rare earth minerals a lot these days, that they want to take from Ukraine. I don't want to name the place. but seriously, if we don't stop the divide and rule in negotiating how those minerals are also priced by developing a similar Pan-African minerals exchange, so to speak, we're not going to be able to address the fundamental issues you raised about being co-rule makers. Now I hear about lab diamonds in Botswana. What does that do to the real diamonds in Botswana and to the people of Botswana? How do we respond to that? These are issues that your remarks have generated for me, and I believe that the debate is bound to continue, but I think we owe you a great deal of gratitude. All Africans, many may not know what you're doing, maybe what they see on CNN, because from time to time we get to see these things about Afrexim, but what you have done particularly to global Africa, not just to the continent, but to global Africa, the way you've rekindled the relationship between global Africa and the continental Africa, the work you're doing with CARICOM, for example, with many of the countries in the Caribbean, it's something that I believe is going to strengthen that discourse of our own ownership vis-a-vis the onslaught that we're dealing with in the world. Let me stop. I have only 5 minutes. According to Professor Epe, let me stop there. But Professor Oramah is leaving, but not tired.
Yes.
So we have other roles that we must find on the continent of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, in the spirit of what we do here at the Africa Leadership Center at King's, we're always interested in, but also invested in intergenerational conversations. And I think very much in line with Professor Oramah's own interest in the wider global South and thinking about how, as Africa, we connect with other parts of the globe, we connect with our own siblings, also in Latin America. It is also my distinct pleasure, therefore, to welcome Dr. Ingrid Agia Schlindwein, who is joining us here as an alumna who recently completed a joint PhD program in international relations at King's College London and the University of Sao Paulo. She's currently a research associate at the University of Oxford's Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center and has also worked on foreign investment for infrastructure projects in developing countries at SOAS, at the University of London. Now, the reason I think especially we're interested in Ingrid coming to also reflect on Professor Oramah's really excellent speech there is because in her doctoral research, she explored the role of middle-income countries in the World Bank's strategies, focusing on international political economy and the ideological power of the institution. And I think we heard from Professor Oramah's speech as well, a lot of the challenges of that international political economy and the implication for that hegemonic power that is experienced within that system. So please join me also in welcoming
Thank you, Professor Ecker. Thank you, Professor Oramah, for your welcoming. Well, after this class given by Professor Oramah about the challenges faced by the African continent and the role of Afrexim Bank in the continent, I mean, I feel humbled to bring any more input on that. But anyway, it's like there's a computer in front of me.
Yeah.
But I mean, throughout my research, I mean, my main goal was to investigate my PhD research on the World Bank. What could we extract of good of those institutions, especially as international relations students and social science students? We always have, especially after the structural adjustment years, very negative image of development banks in general, especially the World Bank. And when we think of the IMF, that's not the same thing. But how could these institutions improve, and what could we get best from those institutions? And I think Professor Oramah brought very important perspective of the role of multilateral financial institutions, especially when we think about the current world situation in which we have this fluidity, as he mentioned, of relations, of allegiances, and of alliances and structures. We see that very much present in the financial world as well. We see an increasing volatility in the world of finance, this cycle of financial crisis shortened, especially with the globalization movement and the opening of global finance. We see a lot more volatility coming not only to the developing world, but also for the developed world as well. But it's still, the developing world is much more vulnerable to these imbalances and to these instabilities than the developed world. Especially because the challenges that the developing world face are huge. I mean, there is a lot of room for investment in everything that is still waiting for to have a momentum, especially in the African continent. So when we think of the role of those financial institutions, especially when we think of the need for long-term investment in all the needs that we can think of, not only the structural transformation of those countries, the strengthening of industrial capacity, and what Professor Oramah brought as innovation, but also we can think of investment in education, we can think of food insecurity, we can think of many things, and even what the traditional development institutions want more to finance, sustainable development and these new ideas. But we have to reflect that these long-term investments have always been considered risky by the commercial bank institutions, because of their own nature, that they require huge amount of financing, they require long-term maturity rates of the investment. They are not supposed to bring quick returns for investors, which is what they consider not risky investment. So these investments over the years have been considered risky by commercial institutions that have decided to charge very high interest rates. And if they are willing to invest in some countries which they consider risky, and those we have to put a lot of the African continent included. So the need for long-term and low interest rate investments has been supplied mainly by these multilateral development institutions. They've been the ones over history that have brought this kind of investment that has not been in place for a lot of the countries in the African continent. These institutions, mainly created by the global north, they haven't been everywhere as well. The capital that they possess has not been enough, or has not been of their interest to invest everywhere and in everything that the African continent needs. What Professor Oramah brought here of indigenous investment, indigenous development of multilateral financial institutions, and also the stimulus for the development of national financial systems in African countries is very welcome. I've been invited for a guest lecture when I was ongoing field research in Angola, and pretty much that was the topic of my lecture, in which I I brought the history of the Brazilian National Development Bank, BNDES, and the growing of this national development finance as a thing pretty much in need to be developed in the latecomers that we call the nations in Latin America and Africa and elsewhere, that didn't start on their insertion in the capitalist system as early as the other nations did. With that said, I mean, some of the topics that were brought by Professor Oramah that I would really like to highlight in that sense as actions from the Afrexim Bank that I pretty much find welcome. The payment and settlement system, I mean, this is something that it's high on debate, as we all know, the payment in local currencies as a way to strengthen the country's abilities to keep their capital finances in order and reduce their indebtedness in relation to the global north or to international investors. One thing that I would like to bring as well is the potential that the existence of institutions such as the Afrexim Bank has in creating not only what I brought about the World Bank as an institution that gather knowledge exchange between countries and exchange of best practices of projects that have been developed, like create this history of knowledge, best practices, but also to as a multiplying factor within the continent. The presence of an institution of this kind serves as a message to the development finance and to the finance in general overall in the world that we are doing our job, and it brings a multiplying factor to attract other investors, considering that the challenges that the African continent face are not small. I mean, so this multiplying factor is something that I would like to highlight as well, that the presence of such a strong institution that is looking at African problems with a different eye can also bring to the African continent. I mean, I mean to be short, there's a lot more that we could keep on talking, but I think our guests have brought a lot of that already. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Abia Schlind-Wine. Thank you very much. Now, forgive me, we don't have a lot of time in the room. Oh, thank you so much. Congrats. We may invite you here.
You don't want to sit.
Oh,
Please.
okay.
Thank you so much. So, colleagues, forgive me. I know I imagine you have a million and one questions, but because of time, we invited our ALC fellows to think through some questions that they would put to Professor Oramah, again in the spirit of our intergenerational exchange as well. So forgive us and allow us to try and foster that. With that in mind, if I can ask our fellows, put in place, I see Camilla. Camilla, please, I'll take the questions in one go and we'll put them to you, Professor Oramah, please. Camilla, do you want to please come forward and ask your question, please? Yeah, well, I don't have a mic.
Oh, okay. No, there's
Just
no
stay
mic.
here so you can hear because we don't have a mic. You do it from the front.
Good evening, Ms. Camilla. The African continent faces a wide range of urgent challenges, which makes it difficult to prioritize. I was just wondering what would make the top of your list when considering the most critical needs for driving socioeconomic transformation across Africa.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Camilla.
Camilla, do I answer?
Please,
Oh,
go
okay.
ahead and I'll ask you.
Well, the critical challenge we face on the continent is the challenge of capital. And why I went through that, although I'm not a historian, but I like history, I went through the historical excursion, is to tell you why we do not have that capital. All the engagements in the evolution of the world was intended to exploit us, not to give back. So because of that, we ended up not having capital. Was it the slave trade that took everybody away? Was it the natural resources that have been taken? And the structure of the education that was instituted? So it was all done not to build capital. And then the fragmentation of the continent that was done such that you would never have enough skill to build the capital to develop it. So the capital problem we have to solve, and that's why I devoted my time to it. And I think we can solve it. We can solve it because despite all that, we have so much. It's just that we have to turn it from potential capital to actual capital. And turning from potential capital to actual capital requires to reverse engineer that colonial strategy that Abba Sarau mentioned. We have to support our own institutions, as I said. We have to make sure we manufacture, we make sure we integrate, we bring the economies back together. We take control of our own financial system to create our own capital. We have to make sure we use our local currency. You cannot build your capital by depending on other people's currency. It's not possible. So those are the kind of things I think we need to do. That's the priority number one. If we solve it, the rest of the problem will just will be resolved.
I think I saw, yeah, please go.
My name is Jim Philo, fellow at AFC. Thank you, Professor. Allow me to begin by adding my thanks to the basket of gratitude. We truly are grateful for your time and incredible insights. My question is really at the intersection of knowledge production and socioeconomic. There appears to be a growing consensus that knowledge production must shift in order to fuel the socioeconomic such that knowledge generated is relevant, timely, and impactful. Now, drawing from your extensive experience, how would you envision the evolution of knowledge creation and what shifts are essential to drive the socioeconomic system? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, people create the knowledge they need. That is it. That the knowledge they need is the knowledge that solves their problem. So you cannot dictate what people should do or not do, so to say. But you create structures that make it possible for people to solve their problem, especially if you operate in a way where knowledge is rewarded in the marketplace, or the output of knowledge is rewarded in the marketplace. Because the institutions, even academic institutions that operate, would go to generate knowledge, produce people that are able to operate and operate economically from a financial point of view in that market. Now, having said that, in the situation where we had on the continent, where we allowed our educational system to decay, was one of the things that led us to the situation we are, including the issue of capital. So what we have is that even right from primary school, the education system became very, very, very weak. And if you don't have it right at the foundation, you cannot have it right as we went on. And if people studied abroad, as either you leave your own country with something in mind that you think I will study and solve a particular problem when I go back, or you say, well, I think the thing that will make things work for me is to do something that will make me employable where I'm going to. So it's not necessarily where you are coming from. But I must also add that today's technology has helped quite a bit. So many products are global goods these days, in the sense that if they are produced, certain kinds of technology are consumed everywhere. Certain kinds of products are consumed everywhere. Be the creative products, even research products, goods that are produced, you can easily put them out, and if people like them, they take them. So because of that, we are beginning to have a kind of harmonization of the needs of society. So harmonization of the needs of the society means that the educational requirements, the products we need to produce, the research we need to do may not necessarily be very much different in Africa as say in the UK or in the US. The only difference would be the technology available for you to conduct the research, or the quality of school available for you to acquire the skills that will make you kind of knowledge. So that's the kind of answer I have to, I think I can give to this.
Thank you.
And I think our final question.
Straight off. I think find out back also legacy.
Well, I think the legacy, I've had this question before this, and I put somebody I read that legacy is better seen from what you live in people than what you live. I think for me, is the confidence in self. I think, and I hope that when I leave, the people I leave behind will say that I gave them confidence in themselves.
Thank you very much.
That would be the legacy that will matter.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. Colleagues, I think that is bringing us really to the final part of this. I think we've heard quite a bit, and so I would struggle to summarize the wealth of knowledge that has been shared here today. I really thank Professor Oramah, visiting professor, Fayemi, Dr. Agia Schlindwein. Thank you very much as well. If I may, I think I wanted to highlight, what we heard from Prof. Fayemi there, where he spoke about moving from sort of those who are recipients, rule takers, I think you said, to co-rule makers. So that for us connects to the conversations we're trying to have about closing distances, co-rule makers, co-actors, and how Professor Fayemi there was highlighting really the significance of the points that were made around building our own multinational financial institutions, really as being at the core of this question. We've heard already in the conversation so far how that is critical because of the significance of capital. And I dare say this points to the work of some of our critical, scholars, some of our ancestors, Samir Amin, who had made this point about the significance of capital, the significance of finance, and that as a continent, we're headed nowhere if we don't think about those things in very serious ways. So I think moving beyond critique to actually mapping out how this sort of thing is possible is an absolutely incredible feat. I'm also glad that my little story about Naira and Kobo in Nigeria is something we heard a bit about there. So the importance of the value of our own currencies and the challenge then. And I love how with Afrexim Bank, something we've accepted as fact, right? That the dollar, we have to use the dollar, we have no choice. There's nothing we can do about that. But what we've heard here about the innovation that is possible, we can move beyond what we have received, what we have seen. And I think this is an absolutely critical message for all of us to take out of here. I also really appreciate how Professor Oramah ended that question about legacy and saying, actually, having laid out all the things that Afrexim Bank is doing, the point about confidence in the self. Because all the things we've heard are going to be impossible if those of us as Africans, but also I love the work on global Africa, right? To challenge geography or to reimagine geography, not to challenge it, to reimagine geography, to think about the connectedness of peoples. To say, yes, we have the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, we've had a colonization, but actually we can remake what Africa is. And to see that actually in action. Again, things that seemed, impossible, right? To see a pathway to that, I think is so incredible, so fascinating. And I'll end on the point, I heard Ingrid making, I think the point you ended on as well, in terms of what I understood, what I took from what you said. about the role of almost documenting this. You know, so the work I hope that will go on at the bank to document what has gone on, right? To recognize how significant, how important it is. That's something actually the multilateral, the global financial institutions do very well. How they document what they do. I mean, we know the World Bank is the knowledge bank. If we're looking for whatever we're looking for, we go there. But to show that yes, we've done this, but it can be done. Challenge ourselves, we move our minds to do that. I really like that point, or at least my own interpretation of that point, and how we can inspire and attract others to the cause. Because much as what Afrexim is doing an amazing job, but we need more hands on deck, right? To show it can be done and encourage others to join in this monumental task. We know the space in which we exist today. A lot of reference was made to that in the conversations, talking about, you know, the end of multilateralism we hear sometimes, but clearly we see how potentially Africa is setting the pace of how this could work. You know, I live for it. I love to hear it. With that, colleagues, let me say thank you so very much for being with us. Please, if you join me, another round.